And welcome back to another episode of Locked On Chiefs. I have Jonathan Davis here from Locked On Longhorns. We're going to talk more about Xavier Worthy today on Locked On Chiefs.
From the land of the free and the home of the Chiefs, this is the Locked On Chiefs podcast.
Chiefs Kingdom, welcome back for another episode of Locked On Chiefs, your daily podcast covering the Kansas City Chiefs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for always making Locked On Chiefs your first listen. Don't forget, we're free and available on all platforms, including YouTube as well. I am Chris Clark from Chiefs Corner. You can find me over there on Chiefs Corner. This is Jonathan, and Jonathan Davis from Locked On Longhorns. We're going to be talking about Xavier Worthy today. We're going to get into what he's going to bring to the field, his growth at Texas. But first off, we're going to dive right into first impressions of when Xavier Worthy showed up at Texas. Jonathan, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. Just ready, like you said, to talk Xavier Worthy, the Kansas City Chiefs, and super excited to see him, in this type of scenario where he's going to be playing championship or buzz football. So really excited for Xavier Worthy. I don't think there's, a better landing spot he could have gone to than the Kansas City Chiefs and arguably the greatest quarterback of all time.
Well, and it's funny because you look at where he was. I didn't think that he was going to make it to 32, obviously, and he didn't. Kansas City moved up to go to 28 to get him. But I was thinking that he wasn't even going to get to 28. I mean, there was mock drafts coming out saying that he could be picked in the top 20. I think I saw 17 was by Peter Schrager. I can't remember the team that he had them going to, but it was kind of surprising that he was there at 28 for Kansas City to pick. And then to be able to trade with the Buffalo Bills was surprising as well. But what did you see from Worthy when he first showed up at Texas? Obviously, the speed is there, and that's a big element of his game, but that's not all he brings to the table.
Right. So, just kind of going through everything. When Steve Sarkisian took over, right, because the summer that Xavier Worthy was a true freshman, that's when Steve Sarkisian took over as the head coach. And Steve Sarkisian largely took over the recruiting class that Tom Herman had left in 2021. Byron Murphy and Jonathan Brooks were also a part of that, recruiting class. And then when you look at it, he goes out and gets Xavier Worthy because Xavier Worthy was committed to Michigan, signed, and then was released from his NLI. And that was the one recruit that Steve Sarkisian brought into his inaugural season at the University of Texas was Xavier Worthy. And based on what Steve Sarkisian had just done at the University of Alabama, winning the national championship, Devontae Smith winning the Heisman, similar height and size profiles, Texas fans are like, okay, we got our Devontae Smith, right? Super fast guy. I'm from California. Obviously, you talked about the speed, the speed, it is where you start the conversation. But you looked at a guy that was in the 160-pound range, and you said you literally had just watched what Devontae Smith did, and you said, okay, that's our version of Devontae Smith. Then you come out in the 2021 season at that point, Sark's first season, and you see Xavier Worthy making plays, right? It starts off a little bit slow, but he's a true freshman. You're not expecting much. I think his first game was one catch for 34 yards, and then it just kind of progressed a little bit after that. First conference game against Texas Tech, he goes for 100 yards, right? Mind you, this is a true freshman, fourth game in college, right? 100 yards. Then 2 games later, the big game, Oklahoma, Red River rivalry, right? Texas, Oklahoma. First play from scrimmage, 75-yard screen pass. He takes it to the house. I know all Chief fans have seen that play by now. Yep. So you're like, wow, that game, 261 yards, one of the best college football games ever. That's the same game that, Caleb Williams comes off the bench and emerges in. Texas, unfortunately, blows a 21-point lead. But like I said, just straight cinema, right? One of the best games you'll ever see. Like I said, Xavier Worthy arguably was one of the best players on the field with 261 yards that day. You're talking about a true freshman that had 981 yards, over 60 catches, and 12 touchdowns his true freshman season. I mean, you don't see that in college football. The only reason he didn't go over 1,000 yards is because Texas was 5-7 that season and didn't go to a bowl game. But what you saw from Xavier Worthy was a bona fide superstar as a true freshman. Yes, we still have Bijan Robinson on the offense, but you looked at Xavier Worthy and said, we have a superstar at the wide receiver position from day one. And like I said, you really just don't see that type of production from a true freshman, right? Usually true freshmen come in and they're 3rd, 4th on the depth chart, if that. And he was our number 1 wide receiver due just to some injuries and him being a really good player. And so when you looked at that 2021 season, it wasn't a great one for, Texas fans and people associated with the program. Texas went 5-7. That Oklahoma game started a 6-game losing streak, which was the longest losing streak for Texas since the 50s, right? So there wasn't much to, really be excited about that season. But I think when Texas fans looked at 2021, I think the only silver lining from that season, the only thing to really be excited about going into 2022, besides one more year of Bijan Robinson, was that you found something in Xavier Worthy. Like I said, you just don't see true freshmen step on the scene like that. 981 yards, 12 touchdowns, 4 100-yard games in 12 games, their true freshman season, 261 yards against your biggest rival. He was a superstar from day one on the 40 acres.
Well, and you're talking about a team that, obviously, like you said, the Texans didn't do well that season, and you kind of look past that season, but you look at the player, and you said something that really stands out to me. And I know 261 yards, the game against Oklahoma was fantastic, but his first game, his one catch for 34 yards. Right there. I mean, just right there, that seems like a small deal, but when you're talking about what he's going to translate to, and we'll get into this later about translating to the NFL, one catch, 34 yards, that tells you he's a deep threat. And obviously the speed is going to make him that. But that also tells you that he saw it from game one in Longhorns fans saw it from game one, that he's able to stretch the field and get vertical and challenge at that part of the field.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. When you look at it, I'm not sure of the exact numbers, but, just from watching football my whole life, I would say the average yards per reception is between about 12 and 15 yards for most receivers, probably maybe a little bit more for speed receivers or the high end guys. And so, like you said, for your first reception to go for 34 yards, right? And then, for you to have 4 100-yard games that season, 5 catches over 50 yards, I think his true freshman season, maybe 4. But either way, right, from day one, you saw that explosive ability, and then he just put it on tape for 3 seasons at the 40 acres.
Well, and then you get into the 261-yard game, and you get into that screen pass from 75. I mean, a screen pass that he takes 75 yards. I mean, that tells you get him the ball in space. And don't get me wrong, obviously there's blocking. I know all that. But you get him the ball in space. He's able to make moves. He's able to use his speed to his advantage. And he can take it to the house. Doesn't really matter if it's a long pass or not. That's also exciting because one of the things you have started to see in the NFL the past several years is bubble screens where you got 2 big guys out blocking in front and somebody behind catching the ball. I'm not going to be surprised if Xavier Worthy isn't going to be doing some of that his first year in Kansas City.
Yeah, and that's a huge thing you talked about. Being able to, I'll take this from Shannon Sharp, being able to hit your head on the goalpost from anywhere, right? You can throw him a screen pass at the 25-yard line and he can score, right? Last year on my birthday, I was at the Texas-Wyoming game where he caught a screen pass and took it 44 yards, where now it was Wyoming, right? But multiple players from Wyoming had the angle and he just runs right past them, right? I mean, you're talking about elite speed, the fastest 40 time we've ever seen at the NFL Combine. I mean, you just can't teach that. And that type of explosiveness is something that can translate on any given play. I mean, he can change the game on any given offensive play. Not even that, because he was an All-American level returner as well. And then you talked about something about how the NFL has changed, right? We've seen a lot of, I can really get in my bag, right? Because we in the NFL and I'm a Cowboys fan, but we've seen a lot of, 2 high safeties recently coming back in the NFL. And we've gone to a lot of the shorter passes, especially the Chiefs when they lost Tyreek Hill. I think we saw Patrick Mahomes' average depth of target go down, right? Even though they were still as productive in terms of high end in the winning, the passing offense looked a little, more pedestrian, right? Because that average depth of target was going down, and they were kind of defenses.
They were taking deep
Patrick
shots.
Mahomes to take what they would give them, and he had to learn how to do that. And so I think that's perfect when you have a player like Tyreek Hill or a player like Xavier Worthy. If they're going to force you to play behind the line of scrimmage, if they're going to force you to take the short stuff, you can still get those explosive 60 and 70-yard plays, even if you throw a 5-yard pass to Xavier Worthy.
Yeah, and there's going to be a lot to talk about when we get to the point of talking about what he brings to the field for the Chiefs. And we'll get to that here in just a little bit. But we're going to talk about his growth at Texas right after our messages from our sponsors. Gametime makes getting NBA Finals tickets even easier and faster. Prices on the Gametime app actually go down closer to the time it gets to tip-off. Whether you're a Mavericks fan or a Celtics fan, go check out Gametime. You can get tickets to the finals. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. Priority last-minute deals save up to 60% buying any last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. They have flash deals saving more than exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or event. Zone deals save even more when you choose a section and let Gametime choose the seats for you. Gametime has the lowest price guarantee. Gametime will give you the lowest price, or they will credit 110% of the difference. Your purchase is guaranteed with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL. That's LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. As someone who likes to golf, I've heard PXG say nobody makes golf clubs like they do, period. And you know what? They are absolutely correct. I went in and I swung the PXG Black Ops driver. It's a total game changer, and you no longer have to sacrifice distance for forgiveness. No matter how good the tools, getting fitted can take your game to a whole new level, and they'll even give you a dozen golf balls for free just for doing it. You need to go check this out at PXG. It is amazing. You get to go in and use a simulator. You are able to feel some of the different grips that you can get on the different clubs that you get. You have one-on-one coaching from somebody there that can help you with your swing, and it can be from the driver to any of your irons, and it is just an amazing experience. You need to go check this out at PXG. And if you're thinking PXG's high-performance equipment is too expensive, their clubs often cost less than so-called leading brands. PXG made me a believer. They'll do the same for every golfer in Kansas City. Visit pxg.com/lockedonchiefs to schedule your fitting at PXG Kansas City, 7517 West 119th Street in Overland Park. Get fitted for any club and you'll get a dozen golf balls for free. That's pxg.com/lockedonchiefs to schedule your fitting. pxg.com/lockedonchiefs. Limit 1 dozen golf balls per person. Promotion ends June 30th. Other terms and conditions may apply. See store for details. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? You have to turn down the volume with all the shouting. Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Jonathan, let's get into what you saw in his growth at Texas. Obviously, we talked a little bit about the 2021 season, but what you see in the seasons after that?
Yeah, so this is an interesting story, and I think when we get to the end of it, it kind of, explains the growth that you see, from the University of Texas, or from Xavier Worthy at the University of Texas, and you see this a lot with, young kids, right, or young men or young women in their respective sports in college. These are 18 to 22-year-olds. I know we just had the COVID year and a lot of red shirts, so you're seeing 24, 25-year-olds, but for the most part, it's 18 to 22-year-olds. And so you get an opportunity to see them a lot of times at their highest and sometimes at their lowest. And I thought the 2022 season was one that wasn't a great one for Xavier Worthy for a lot of reasons, right? And so we kind of saw that big, kind of top of the mountain 2021 season. And then I thought he came down a little bit, right? Statistically, and then some things outside of that as well. So when you looked at it, all of his numbers dropped. Now he did deal with, like a broken hand. He didn't really miss too many games. And so he was out there and, kind of the, excuse goes away, right, when you're playing, because they say if you're out there on the field, you're healthy, right? And so even though the production dropped, right, he wasn't healthy. Go ahead.
Well, and the point I want to make on that, and I'm glad you brought that up, because there are a lot of people that look at his drops at Texas and say that he's going to have a drops problem in the NFL. They're not taking into account he played through a broken hand. As a receiver, that's phenomenal to do. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I want to point that out, because that's a great point on Xavier Worthy and how he played through different things in college.
Right. And so, the production dropped. There were times where, fans may have perceived, that there were, effort issues, especially on deep balls. And the reason that it was kind of so disappointing, especially for Texas fans, is because when you looked at what he did in 2021, you just reasonably expect that he's going to take the next step, right? 981 yards in 12 games. Next thing is 1,300 yards, right? 12 touchdowns. Okay, he's going to go to 15. 70-something catches, whatever, he's going to catch 100, right? And that just didn't happen. Statistically, he went down. But you're expecting all of that to go up because Quinn Ewers comes in, right, as your quarterback in 2022. And so you say, okay, he's going to throw the ball all over the yard, and Xavier Worthy is going to benefit more than anybody from it. And like I said, that just didn't happen. Texas went 8-5, which was an improvement from the 5-7 season. But anytime you go, have 5 losses at the University of Texas, fans are going to be disappointed. And then for the first 2 years, right, like I said, Xavier Worthy's numbers dropped. There were just times where he looked disengaged, times where the fans may have perceived that he wasn't all the way there. For the first 2 years at the University of Texas, we heard a lot of USC rumors, right? With Lincoln Riley there, Caleb Williams there, Xavier Worthy being a California kid. And after his freshman year, they were really just kind of, rumblings, right? Just rumblings. But after his second year, it felt like a real thing. I mean, I was hearing, whether it was validated or not, I was hearing from people that Xavier Worthy to USC was almost a done deal, And then to make matters worse, after Texas lost to Washington in the Alamo Bowl after 2022, Xavier Worthy went up to Dallas to the USC Tulane game in the Cotton Bowl, right? So to add fuel to the fire, Texas fans are already feeling like, well, damn, if you're just going to leave us and go to USC, go ahead, right? They're already feeling some type of way about Xavier Worthy. So he makes it worse and purposely goes to the USC game to kind of troll, right? And so I thought that, the 2022 season just wasn't the best for him. And I thought what was huge for him coming into the 2023 season, this past season where Texas had their best, season in over a decade, was Big 12 Media Days. I'll never forget when he spoke at Big 12 Media Days. He was one of the 4 or 5 players, selected to go from the University of Texas by Steve Sarkisian. He said that he needed to be a better leader in the 2023 season, but not just physically, right? Not just in terms of leading on the field, spiritually, mentally, emotionally, right? He needed to be a better man for this football team, right? But also he needed to be a better man for himself. And I think we saw that, right? And I think Xavier Worthy was challenged a little bit. The psyche of wide receivers, right? When you go out and get an Adonai Mitchell, right? In the offseason, when you have Xavier Worthy, but you say, and obviously you're not going to turn down an Adonai Mitchell player, but when you go out and get an Adonai Mitchell, I'm not saying that's an indictment on Xavier Worthy, but it says something, right? Steve Sarkisian felt like he needed another alpha at the wide receiver position, even though he already had Xavier Worthy. And I think that was the best thing for Worthy, right? Because it kind of showed him okay, I need to be doing more. It's a contract year. They've gone out and got another guy. I didn't have the best season last year. I need to be better for this football team. And I think you saw that last year, his best season in terms of yardage and catches, the touchdowns were down, but Adonai Mitchell had 11 of them, right? And so he was a really good football player for us this past year. You saw him really come on as, a returner. I think he was an All-American in that regard, and just had a really solid season. And in terms of the numbers, they weren't super sexy, right? But Texas goes 12-2 and makes the college football playoffs and, are one good throw away from the national championship game. To me, when you look at the story that I've just told over the past 17 minutes, from Xavier Worthy coming in as a true freshman from a 5-7 season, right? A team that really had no, where to go, had no culture, just we're still trying to figure things out. I mean, they lost to Kansas, his true freshman season, going to a team when he left that was a play away from making the national championship game. Xavier Worthy is responsible for that culture change. Xavier Worthy is responsible for the change in this Texas program. Xavier Worthy is partly responsible for me being able to wear this hat with pride again, right? The University of Texas football team being talked about in high regard after the last decade being a laughingstock. Xavier Worthy is one of the biggest reasons for that. So when you talk about his growth at Texas, he came in as a true freshman from California that helped change this program in just 3 short years to being one of the best football teams in the country. And then I talked about that individual growth because 2022, he did not have the season that he had in 2021. He did not live up to expectations in 2022. And to come back and be better from it in 2023, not only as a football player, but as a leader, speaks to the type of person that Xavier Worthy is and the type of player that the Chiefs are getting.
Well, and when you look at all the growth, I mean, obviously 2022 was a down year, and that's pretty obvious from anybody that just looks. I mean, statistically speaking, it was a down year. 2023, obviously, like you said, his stats go up, his touchdowns go down a little bit, but he does have Adonai Mitchell right there with him. And I think you make a great point. When you're a starter at your position and you're the number one guy, which Mitchell was seen, or I'm sorry, which Worthy was seen as the number one guy at Texas before Mitchell came in. It changes your thought process when they bring in somebody like that to the team. Now you're talking about a situation where he's not going to be the alpha in Kansas City. There's several people that are going to be above him in that regard, but he learned from last year, and I think that's going to be something that's going to be important when you bring into what he's going to be bringing to the field in Kansas City. But when you talk about his growth at Texas, and one of the things that really stood out to me watching him play, obviously the speed is there, but he also he has good hands. I mean, we talked about his broken hand. He had a couple of drops in that, and people are going to say, well, he has a drops problem. It's not a drops problem. It's you break your hand, you're going to drop some balls
It's a
that
health
you
problem.
normally would catch. Yeah, but he played through it. That's the big note on that. But then you also look at some of the catches that he was able to make and the way he can go about making catches. And that's really kind of a little bit different also from what you would expect from somebody with that body type.
Yeah, I think, the narrative has been put on him, especially when he ran a 4.21. I almost thought that running a 4.21 kind of hurt him in a certain regard, not in terms of where he actually got drafted and things like that. But it's like he runs a 4.21 and then all of a sudden all the narratives are, can he run routes? Like, have you watched 3 years of tape where he was running excellent routes the last 3 years before you saw that 40 time? But yeah, I do think, and we can talk about this a little bit in the next segment, I do think he needs to get better at playing through contact. That's probably the one thing, I think we didn't see at the University of Texas enough. And, at that stature, you're probably not going to see a ton of it, but yeah, definitely. I think, the narrative was put on him, that he was a smaller receiver or he's just a speed guy. Right. And, when you run that fast, that kind of becomes the label on you. But I think he's a complete receiver, right? You talked about his ability to make tough catches. He played a lot going over the middle in college, you know what I mean? And so, he made plays. And then you saw a mean streak at times, right? I've seen him run people over multiple times at the University of Texas at 165 pounds soaking wet. So, yeah, the narrative, on him is he's just a small speed receiver, but he brings so much more to the football field than that.
Well, and I want to get this from you. I know my opinion, and we'll talk about that in a second, but ball tracking, what did you see from him when it came to ball tracking when he was at Texas?
I thought ball tracking is something that, I think ball tracking is an inconsistency, was an inconsistency at times at the University of Texas for Xavier Worthy. I think really just in terms of chemistry, especially in 2022, it never felt like Quinn Ewers and Xavier Worthy were on the same page. I think you saw, better from that regard in 2023. But I would still say something that, in terms of consistent ball tracking and being able to, track it in the air and adjust your body to get to it where it is, I would still say that's something that's a work in progress for Xavier Worthy.
Yeah, and I agree with that. But I also say that it's a little bit of a different situation when you look at what Kansas City had in Marquez Valdez-Scantling, a guy that did not seem to be able to track the deep ball at all. Going to a guy in Xavier Worthy, while it may be a work in progress, I see a lot more of an opportunity there as long as he can get to be more consistent and get on the same page with Patrick Mahomes, which is what OTAs that are going on right now and what training camp is going to be all about. So when we get back, we're going to talk about what he brings to the field in Kansas City and what we're going to see in those training camp practices right after this. This segment is brought to you by our sponsor, BetterHelp. Sometimes we all need the opportunity to get something off of our chest. Big or small, certain things can really start to get to you. It's important to let that out, especially to someone who's unbiased on your life. So today, I want to say something about how I really feel about something. You might be even thinking the same thing this week. I have to tell you, the more and more I look into this Chiefs offense, the more and more excited I get. You have Travis Kelce coming back as the number one wide receiver. You have Hollywood Brown that got added in the offseason. Rashee Rice will be back at some point. You add in Xavier Worthy, and you add in a guy in Jared Wiley, and this offense is going to be something that can cook. Not to mention Noah Gray and the 3 tight end sets. All of this is looking to be a lot of fun for the Chiefs and this offense this season. Therapy can be different for everyone. Most of us have bigger problems than our favorite sports team. And it's important to get things off your chest every once in a while. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be flexible and suited to your schedule. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp.com/lockedon. BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. All right, Jonathan, let's get into what he brings to the field for the Chiefs. I'm sure we talked about, his start at Texas, his last couple of years. What do you see now that he was a finished product at Texas and that he's going to be bringing to Kansas City?
Yeah, I just want to say really quickly, in terms of adding to that ball tracking point, ball tracking becomes a lot easier when the ball's getting put in the bucket, and I have no doubt in my mind that Patrick Mahomes can put the ball in the bucket. So, I think Xavier Worthy would be just fine. You brought up that, Marquez Valdez-Scantling. I remember that one play. I can't remember who it was against last year, but it was bad. So it cost the Chiefs a win. But when you look at Xavier Worthy, right, I don't want to bury the lead. When you look at Xavier Worthy, what he brings to this Chiefs teams, I think just explosiveness, right? I talked about the fit and, how I'm not sure that there's a better team he could have gone to, right? When you look at it, people say, how could Buffalo trade out of that position and give the Chiefs Xavier Worthy? Now, I think that's a fair question for sure, but I'm not sure Xavier Worthy is in a better situation if he's in Buffalo right now. I think the Chiefs are perfect. When you look at Andy Reid's track record with speed receivers, I mean, Deshaun Jackson, Jeremy Maclin, Tyreek Hill, even Mecole Hardman and Kadarius Toney to a lesser extent. Andy Reid is a genius, right? And he knows how to utilize speed. Then you talk about a player in, Patrick Mahomes that probably has the best combination of arm strength and accuracy down the field that can utilize Xavier Worthy. And then I talked about it a little bit in the last segment that the narrative and the conversation is going to be around the 4-2-1, right? He's going to be a speed receiver. He's a deep receiver. He can get downfield. He can hit his head on the goalpost at any point. But I think he really brings a lot of nuance to the wide receiver position that's not talked about enough in terms of his route running, his footwork, getting in and out of breaks, his ability to go over the middle. I talked about, playing through contact. That's something he's going to have to do in the National Football League. His speed, but not only his speed, his quickness, right? His savviness as a route runner, knowing how to throttle up, throttle down, set up defenders, you know what I mean? Stab at the top of the route, set up, get them going one way and go the other way. So, like I said, the conversation is going to be around the 4-2-1, but I really think the Chiefs are getting a complete receiver. Now, I think the question is going to be, are they getting, what level? I think right now, like you said, I think Rashee Rice and, Travis Kelce certainly will be, 1 and 2 above him, right? But when you draft somebody in the first round, you're expecting them to eventually be the guy in some regard. We don't know how longer Travis Kelce is going to play, and Rashee Rice is just a wild card at this point. So when you look at Xavier Worthy, right, I think the question is what is his ceiling, right? I think his floor with a 4-2-1 and his ability to run routes will always be a very good wide receiver in a wide receiver trio, right? But can he get to that high end number 2 or bona fide number 1 wide receiver position with the Kansas City Chiefs? That's going to be my question for Xavier Worthy long term. But what are they getting? A dog, no question about it.
Well, and you make a great point. And the guy that you didn't mention is Hollywood Brown, who I'm not going to say.
I forgot about Hollywood. That's me. I forgot about Hollywood.
No, you're good. I want to mention that because I'm not going to say that their games are the same. They're not, but they're very similar. And the thing that makes me excited about having Worthy with Hollywood Brown is that Worthy can learn from Hollywood Brown. And I think that that's going to be a big thing going forward in his career. But the other part of it is, and this is something you mentioned in the last segment, when you go back and you look about when they brought in Mitchell and what it made Worthy do, and it made him look inside and try to figure out what he needed to do better. He's now stepping into a situation where obviously he's not going to be the alpha, like I said earlier, but he already started his learning process last year. So you got to think that that's going to help him be even more receptive to trying to get to a point where maybe he can get to be a number 1 type wide receiver even quicker, because he already knows he's got learning to do, and this is a different game.
Yeah, definitely a different angle I want to take it. You talk about learning how to play, kind of necessarily in a secondary role, but I'm not even sure if Xavier Worthy saw himself in a secondary role last year. I think he just looked at it as, I need to step up. They're bringing in Adonai Mitchell for a reason. I look at it more of a, iron sharpens iron standpoint, right? When you bring in a guy like Adonai Mitchell, that makes Xavier Worthy better. And when you're playing with a Rashee Rice, a Hollywood Brown, and a Travis Kelce, that in a Patrick Mahomes, who's going to demand greatness, that should make Xavier Worthy better. So those people in the room, right, even the front office, right, how successful they are. Andy Reid, I mean, talk about reverence there, right? That's iron. That should sharpen Xavier Worthy's iron, right? And so he should be better from everybody who's around. And I love the Hollywood Brown point, you brought up, because similar to Xavier Worthy, when they're on, or when the ball is in their hands, I mean, it's hard for them not to look like the best player on the field. But it's the inconsistency. You're always wondering why Hollywood Brown hasn't done more. And I think at times, you wondered why Xavier Worthy couldn't do more at Texas, even outside of, the times when his hand were broken. So, yeah, that's a great comparison there. But I think that's a great player to learn from. But like I said, all those people in the room, I mean, you're talking about Hall of Famers, right? People with, busts that are going to be put up, in Canton, Ohio. So, that iron definitely should sharpen Xavier Worthy's iron. And he's going to a good situation. He's not going to, I think the Bears are going to be good, but like you could use them as an example, like, a Bears team where there's maybe no culture. They don't know how to win. You don't have great vets, things of that nature. I mean, he's going to the Chiefs, right? And so iron sharpens iron. He'll be just fine.
Well, I love what you said there, because that's a huge piece. Kansas City only brings in people they think are going to fit in their culture. And I do think that has lost Kansas City some players that they maybe would have gone and signed otherwise, because they didn't think they would fit the culture like what they have. And they have a strong leader in Patrick Mahomes. They have a leader in Travis Kelce. And we're not talking defense, but they have a leader in Chris Jones. All of those guys are bought in and doing the same thing and bought into what Andy Reid has brought. they're not going to bring in people that aren't going to buy into that. So that's a big piece of this. The thing that you haven't said that I'm a little surprised about, but is being talked about by Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid, and I think even Matt Nagy has mentioned this, is how smart he seems. His football IQ seems to be something that they're really impressed with. And I think that that is so important, and it's a small thing that people don't take into consideration very often. But in an Andy Reid offense, that's huge and could be paying dividends for Kansas City if he can learn the offense quicker than most other wide receivers.
Yeah, definitely. That's something that's just kind of hard, for me to quantify. I wasn't in the room, I wasn't in the building, so
I understand.
I'm really just seeing, what I'm hearing and seeing on the field. But yeah, I mean, I think, to exceed at this level, exceed at the level he did at the University of Texas, you have to have a certain level of football IQ. And then when you look at Steve Sarkisian, somebody that's running an NFL offense, but probably one of the most complex offenses in college football, right? I mean, you have to be a smart football player to be able to learn that, right? Learn when you're supposed to motion, learn where you're lining up on the field, because he lined up at all 3 wide receiver spots, right? Things like that, when you're blocking, when you're going out on a route, what route you're supposed to be running, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, definitely, and like you said, it just, the Chiefs are successful for a reason. Even before Patrick Mahomes, they weren't winning Super Bowls, but they were successful, right? Because from top down, it's a great organization. And so they're not going to bring in somebody that, like you said, they have to worry about their culture, but they're also not going to bring in somebody that they're going to have to worry about if they're understanding the play, or if they're going home and spending extra time in their playbook or on their iPad, grasping the offense and things like that. They brought Xavier Worthy in because they think he's a great football player, but they also think he's a great person that will make them a better organization. So like you said, the football IQ certainly is something that they saw, and a reason that he's in a Kansas City Chiefs jersey.
Jonathan, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate it. Tell people where they can find you.
Yes, sir. They can find me at Jonzo Ball, like Lonzo Ball. That's my regular Twitter. You can find me at Locked On Horns on Twitter. You can find me at Locked On Longhorns on YouTube, or wherever you get your podcast. You can find me at the national championship game where the Texas Longhorns get their first win since 2005 this season. Hook 'em. And congrats on getting Xavier Worthy, Chiefs Kingdom.
I appreciate that, man. It's been a lot of fun. Thank you all for listening. We will be back tomorrow to talk more about the Chiefs and OTAs, and we will see you then.